大家好，我很荣幸来到香港Union Jintan, and my accent really sucks, I know, I'm sorry about that. 今天我很高兴向您介绍 BTB 的知识. I'm not going to try and make any more terrible attempts at really bad Chinese accents tonight. I'll do a little bit more tomorrow and whatever else, but I'm practicing. My handwriting's actually better than my speech because, it's taken me a long time to even hear the tones. So I'm going to talk about the history of Bitcoin, peer networks, and many other things tonight. So let's go over some of these things with Merkle trees. Now, there are lots of so-called experts out there that tell you why Bitcoin can't scale, and I'm going to ruin all this for you. Merkle trees and whatever else are horrible, horrible things unless you scale. To have 2,000 transactions with a double hash structure in Bitcoin, as we have now in 1 meg blocks, is horrendously slow. You are hashing between 34 and 50 times for every block. Now, by breaking things up into small transactions, you are actually decreasing the amount of time per hash, but it's not a linear thing. So what you're doing is, instead of the 1 meg hash that you could hash once with, say, a half-second hash on a Raspberry Pi, you do a quarter of a second hash with the smaller bits, but you do it 50 times. So you half the time per hash, but multiply it by 50 times. That doesn't sound too efficient, does it? Don't know about you, but it seems a really stupid way of making a system. Now, if you wanted to make BTC with guaranteed really fast 1 meg blocks, you would hash it once. You would hash the whole block structure. Do you know it's no more secure? Because don't believe the lie you've been told. A hash is a message digest. It is not a security function. It can be used in the creation of security protocols. It's an index function. It takes a big file and puts a set length individual index. That's what a hash does. So you can take a 5 gig file and get one single index that you can use to prove nothing has changed. So if you hash a 1 meg file once and you change one single bit anywhere in that file, the hash is utterly different. So this whole nature of having to hash a 1 meg block 50 times, sorry, no you don't. But a Merkle tree structure is like a chessboard. If anyone remembers the old story of how chess was invented, the guy who apocryphally invented chess came up with the idea, just pay me 1 grain of rice, but double it every single square. And by 64, which the number of chess squares, there wasn't enough rice in the universe, so the king killed him instead. So probably not a good deal, at least for the inventor. Now, that's the same with Merkle trees. When you're looking at your 1 meg block with a depth of between 12 and 16, it's horrendously inefficient. But the scaling feature of Merkle tree is such that as you get deeper, when you're talking about breaking only the index down, you can have at 32, a depth of 32, just double what there is there, the same as 2 blocks, you can now have 4 billion transactions. Not thousands, billions. And by the time you get to 48, you are in hundreds, literally hundreds of trillions of transactions. By the time you get to 64, if anyone ever got to that, we don't have enough atoms in our solar system to actually cover it, so we probably don't need to worry about calculating it. So the fact here is the hash is part of a scaling solution. It's not a security solution. That's where people are going wrong. Instead of hashing the entire block, we do 2 things in Bitcoin. We have miners hash the entirety and validate it and check things. And we have users only need SPV. The SPV header is only 80 bytes. Every 10 minutes, a user has 80 bytes. That's it. So this idea of having 2-second blockchains and all that stuff just increases basically what users need to download. It decreases scalability. So by having lots and lots of small transactions every few seconds, you make it more and more difficult for a user to actually use Bitcoin. If you only need to download what you're doing, that's all you care about. So the secret of SPV is very simple. When a miner puts something in a block and it's been validated, and only miners, by the way, can actually do anything. These Sybil nodes that don't have any hash power do nothing. They can't change the network, they can't alter the network, they can't do anything. Because the function of nodes, section 5 of the white paper, is to validate all the blocks, find the solution, and then propagate it. Not to find it and hide it like selfish mining, to propagate it. You win when every other miner has your block. Not every other node, every miner. So all users need is a block header and the transactions that they need. Now, the secret that no one seems to have figured out in all these years is with a Merkle tree, I don't need to check everything. I can check the input transaction. If you give me a transaction and you give me the Merkle path, you tell me where it is in the network, I can look it up like that nearly instantly. I can then look and see whether it's been spent before. If it's a valid UTXO, that's an unspent transaction, and no other conflicting transactions exist, I know I can spend that transaction if it goes to me. Now, when I receive it, I want to make sure of one thing, that I get paid. This whole nature of Ethereum and Bitcoin Core running around going, you need to validate everyone's transactions is bull. Because quite simply, how many of you care if some guy in Lithuania gets his money tomorrow? No one from Lithuania? Okay, so do you really care if someone you've never met gets paid? Probably not. Bitcoin works because you will check. You will look at your own transaction and you will validate that it goes to the address you set up. When I created Bitcoin, one of the things involved in the system was a peer-to-peer network, IP to IP. SPV works because I go up to the other person, I go up and go, hi, have my transaction, and I exchange. And I don't trust the network to give me the transaction or the address or trust that they'll send it to the right one. When I go up and I go, hi, can I pay you? Then what I do is I ask for the template. And they give me where they want to pay. I mean, if you're going to get paid, don't you want to set where you're going to get paid? And in a peer-to-peer network, that's possible. You go up to someone, you ask them, where do I pay you? And they send back an address, a template, or whatever else. And you sign that. You then put your inputs into it. They've given you the outputs, so there's nothing to manipulate. And then you sign it. And you hand it back. You don't need to broadcast it. So if I'm offline and I want to pay a merchant, I don't need to be online. And you want to know why this works? Because the merchant cares. The merchant wants money. When you pay a merchant, the merchant is going to go out there and propagate your transaction as quickly as possible, and they will check to ensure that it hasn't been spent before. Why? Because they want to be paid. Very simple. This is where things get complex, because It actually means people have to actually care about their money, no one else's. And if the merchant sees that you've double spent, they'll notice it within 2 seconds or so, because it's a time-based propagation. And if you have 2 seconds head start, you win. So if someone double spends in 2 seconds, right now Visa takes 4 or 5 seconds to properly transact. So if a merchant is making a coffee for you, you're in the shop and it gets double spent, guess what? You have now signed an admissible piece of evidence saying, I've bounced a check, in effect, and please send me to jail, and oh, I'm not getting my coffee. Because it takes more than 2 seconds to make a coffee. So by the time someone's made the coffee, they know that the network is secure. That's it. Not anything really that special. So the Merkle tree is all about scaling. So when I talk about simplified payment verification and whatever else, we're just looking at you keep your input. So when I've now handed that input, you keep it. Don't throw it away. That's how it scales. You don't need to download every transaction. You save the input and you hand that input and output. And that's enough to validate everything. That's all you need to do. You don't need to validate every single transaction ever on the blockchain. Just the ones that you receive and know that your address is correct. If someone gives you a different template, the modified where your payment address or output, don't take it. If someone sends it to some other place, you don't take it. That's it. You don't accept someone altering your template. If you say this is where I want to get paid, and they don't send you money to that address, then they haven't paid you. That simple. So the complexity here is far less than people think. It's, I keep my input transactions. I know whatever's going to go into where I send. And now I ask you for my output transaction that I'm going to pay you on. I add everything together and I send it. And now you keep those input transactions in your wallet. You don't throw them away. You don't keep the entire blockchain. You don't need to validate some guy in Lithuania's coffee spend. You need to validate yours. Now, you can hand over that for an extra quick payment to prove everything on the blockchain without having everything. That's all you need of those blocks. That's why you send the Merkle path and you keep the block header. The block header is 80 bytes. That's it. Little tiny thing every 10 minutes. Someone on a very small Raspberry Pi from 10 years ago can still run all of that without any effort. So this is what people aren't getting. Bitcoin is not validating everyone's transaction everywhere. Ethereum should never have been about everyone validating every transaction everywhere. Bitcoin is designed as what is known as a multi-layer overlay. Each system is a peer network. The miners are nodes, and only miners are nodes. If you read section 5 of my white paper, it's very specific. It actually says all the steps you need to do, and only miners create blocks. So only miners are nodes. That simple. Once you get those transactions sent, once they're there, the miners will process them. Do you know why miners process transactions? Anyone? Fees. When I set up Bitcoin, I set it up with a degrading subsidy. The block reward is not a reward, really. It's a subsidy. It halves. Why? Because that incentivizes people to move, basically to pull their finger out and start building. Because they will lose money over time as the halving happens. There's none of this, it's going to go up in value because there's less. Scarcity alone doesn't make value. There are lots of things that are really scarce that are not valuable. There are chemical elements that are incredibly rare and they're worth next to nothing. because they have no use, other than a few labs and things like that wanting to experiment. The reality is scarcity alone is not value. Value is because of a double-edged scissor. It is both supply and demand. And having limited supply but no demand means nothing. You need both sides. You need someone wanting to use your commodity. And Bitcoin is a commodity. It's an informational commodity. It is information, and it has value because it's used, when it's used. And it competes with other sources of information, other databases, saying it's decentralized and distributed. So what? It's not the first proof of work distributed cryptocurrency by a long time. The first one of that was PPay. Rivest of RSA fame and a couple other people made one called PPay in 1996. It was a proof of work distributed cryptocurrency. They had no idea as cryptographers about economics, so it died. By the end of that peer-to-peer craze, in 2001, 2002, we had eMule and Mojo Nation, both distributed cryptocurrency systems. They called them credit systems, but at the end of the day, they're still the same. Both of them failed. Not because they were distributed, not because they weren't distributed or that they weren't proof of work or anything else, because of the economic system. And one of the main things that all of these have failed with, and why they have, is they seek anonymity. They seek making a system that governments can't get to and touch. Governments can get to and touch everything. Liberty Reserve was bigger in number of transactions and everything like that than Bitcoin and Ethereum and Zcash and Monero and all the rest put together. And it's gone. 42 countries. The US, China, Russia, both Britain and France, and that doesn't happen very often in human history, all of them agreed. And they took Liberty Reserve down. And it was decentralized. It basically ran like a Wala network where people had individual amounts across the world, banks all over the place. It doesn't exist anymore. The founders are in jail. And the founders said, hey, you can't do anything because we're not making money. It's cryptocurrency. And Arthur Badowski actually argued that. And the judge said, the law says funding. And the judge, to paraphrase, said, I don't care whether it's money, whether it's gold, whether it's US dollars, whether it's pounds, whether it's oil, whether it's wheat, whether it's stocks, or whether it's watches. You are funding people. That's what actually people are going to start to realize. Funding. If you are funding someone, you are covered by the FATF rules. You are covered by money laundering. Doesn't matter about cryptocurrency, that simple. So, when we're talking about this, and we're talking about this little section in the white paper here, SPV enables simple, easy lookups because you don't need to have the full block. As I said, a hash is not a security function, it is a message digest, it's an index. With a hash, you can take a large file, and the original version of Bitcoin, the opcode oppush data 4 allowed you to have the Windows limit of 4.3 gigs per line in script. Of course, you can't do that right at the moment, but that will be possible again eventually. So people can pay horrendous fees to send silly bits of data forever. But it will be possible. But the thing is, as a user, you don't need to ever check that. You only check what you receive. The miner gets that. And here's another secret. Why double hash? There are a few reasons for double hashes. A double hash will allow you to filter out bad content, child porn, illegal content, other things that you want to filter will be able to be issued to miners, and miners will be able to match hash values, and actually without even having the transaction, because it's a hash of a hash, will be able to filter content. Sorry, that's how it works. On top of that, because of a double hash structure in the block, it means that you will be able to set up things with a Merkle structure so that someone in China, in Western China, where they have cheap electricity, will be able to make a deal with someone in Hong Kong or Japan and send only a block header as proof. So rather than having to go through the Chinese firewall with large transactions of terabyte blocks instantly, you can set up a trust-resistant transaction. One where if someone mines and orders a block and doesn't do what they've guaranteed to do, neither party gets paid. So imagine this. Imagine you have an ordering system where all the blocks are created, terabytes in size, and you stick that on a nice fast internet pipe, say somewhere in Hong Kong. Now, that Hong Kong connection can pump that out to other miners around the world really, really quickly. And they can send only the hashes of the transactions they have ordered really, really quickly. They don't need to give you all the information. So they can send that information fast because, again, a hash is a message digest. That's an index function. For those who are doing computer science, it means instead of sending the whole lot, we only send a little tiny bit of data. Now, you can now set up a structure where the people in China who have lots of really cheap power get only part of the block header and some of the Merkle proof structure that shows that they're being paid. So you hand the guys in China a Merkle proof that shows the Chinese guys have a transaction that guarantees payment. If they mine this block, they get paid X. So they're going to now put effort and power into mining this. And to do this with a Merkle structure and a double hash means an 80-byte header, 1K, the structure itself, and basically your entire transaction can be under 3K. The guy in Hong Kong can now send a 3K transaction over to China, and the Chinese miner knows no way can they be screwed by the other guy. And the other guy in Hong Kong knows they can't be screwed either, because if they solve the wrong hash puzzle, the guy in Hong Kong doesn't get paid. So you work together or you fail together. And no one's going to spend lots and lots of money making a relationship between a block ordering entity and a hashing entity and then screw themselves. It's a lot of money. Hundreds of millions of dollars in hash facilities right now. Data centers cost a lot of money. All of this is expensive. So Bitcoin has double hashing to allow specialization. For those who've read old Adam Smith there, it's all about specialization. If you remember, he talked about a pin maker. And it sounds boring, but there was a guy to pull the wire straight, there's a guy to make the little funny round head bits, a guy to stick them together, a guy to put them in boxes. Why? Specialization. And that's what's going to happen in Bitcoin. So we're going to see these guys have really fast transactions. And my petabyte block one day from now will be sent through the Chinese firewall, but it will go really quickly. And the reason is very simple, because I don't need to send all petabytes worth of data. I can send 3K and allow that to be verified. And that's how we make a system that works, that scales. That if you think about it for a second, if you worry about, oh, they can block my transaction, really? How many people think they couldn't get 3K anywhere in the world? That you couldn't bounce it around every single country and back again? 3K is nearly impossible to stop. Petabytes might be, but 3K? Nah, forget it. You can send it by carrier pigeon fast enough. So, as I've been saying, we want to verify that a transaction has been included in a block. So your SPV client only requires headers, 80 bytes each, anywhere in the world, whether it's China, whether it's Iran, I don't really care, 80 bytes every 10 minutes. Not a lot. Even people on 1.44K modems or 14.4K modems can get that very quickly. So you then want to save the Merkle path. When you get your transaction and you've validated it, you save the Merkle path. It just makes things quicker. You can look it up afterwards, but that takes extra time and effort. If you want to have a nice, fast transaction, save it. Effectively, people don't seem to realize that the minimum file size when you're talking about things like Windows and phones and everything like that is incredibly wasteful. If you're on a large hard drive on Windows right now, your sector size is probably 64K. So to save 1K as a file, you waste 63K. So effectively, you can save all of this and you're taking up one sector on your hard drive and you're not even going to notice. That's how it scales. So what we need is check SPV. We check the inputs, as I said, make sure that our output is fine, and then we broadcast it. The receiver should broadcast the transaction. Not I send it to the network and hope it gets through or whatever. Now, the reason this stopped is a whole lot of anarchist silliness about if I do that, people will know my IP address. Well, here's the thing. If you're buying something and you're trading, then people know who you are anyway if you're in a legitimate market. If you go onto Amazon, generally people actually want to know where the goods get delivered. You generally don't go up to Amazon and go, I'm not going to tell you my home address. And they'll go, how do I send it to you? Don't care, just find me. Think about it. I mean, we're not talking trying to hide behind baggies and whatever else in the drug world. We're talking about reality. People want to buy things, people want to sell things. And if you really want, you can use a VPN. You could buy a VPN service using Bitcoin. And if you're super paranoid, because you don't trust the VPN service, you can have a VPN pointed to a VPN pointed to a VPN going through Tor pointed to a VPN. And after your really slow latency, high latency network connection, no one knows who you are. Yippee! So you can be as paranoid as you want at the same time. So as I was saying, we're looking at a system that gets more efficient the deeper we go. Merkle trees are horrible structures until you get in the sort of 1 gigabyte range. If you're talking block size less than a gigabyte, no way on earth anyone in their right mind who had any clue would ever include one on Bitcoin. Sorry. At the end of the day, we are talking a structure that it is designed to have a lot of data. Not 1 meg blocks, not 10 meg blocks, not gigabyte blocks. Something that will scale eventually to petabyte blocks. And not because of this whole techno-communist idea of everyone being equal. We're not. Get over it. I'm sorry. You're all in a university. You're elite. I don't care whether you like it or not. You're the elite. You're the future elite. Accept it. Welcome to real life. Even in China, you'll probably, if you're doing computer science, STEM, whatever else, you'll probably be the 1%. So if you want to complain about them, welcome to it. You are. So we have this system here that scales. But it allows us now to build all sorts of things. It lets us have overlay networks. With a hash structure, with a message digest, we can take all sorts of other information and embed it. In the 90s, there were hundreds literally hundreds of cryptocurrencies, hundreds of peer networks, hundreds of failed experiments. None of them, not one, solved a simple thing without having a central entity that needed to control everything, which was double spending. That's it. But every one of those projects is valid, apart from the fact that they couldn't solve double spending. They needed to order transactions. So in the next coming year, we're going to start looking at expanding out what we've been doing, which will mean overlay networks and things like that as well. So Bitcoin, you don't need to put everything on the blockchain. You can put archive on the blockchain and it'll be slow. How do you speed it up? You might have an immutable file stored forever on the blockchain. It's going to be slow. What you do is you create a file network, another peer layer. Why I called this a Mandela network is because it is concentric overlay networks. Now, what you start doing is you have the hash of the transaction data stored as an index. The same way Cassandra, Hadoop, all these other big data databases do it. You sort using the hash. Now, I can set up a contract. I can pay it out there and have it provably spendable by anyone who does certain tasks. You can have proof of file. So with a hash of a hash, I can actually take partial Merkle tree hashes of a file. Say I've got a 1 gig file. I can break that file into overlapping sections. And I can have a request that says, give me section 1, section 9, section 432, and section 8, hash them and tell me what they are. And if you can do that, you get paid. To do that, you need to have the file. So, what I can also do is now pay for bandwidth based on what I'm actually going to want to have and what I can afford to pay. So, say I pay 1 BSV. If it is economically viable, any person able to distribute that network using old-style distributed network software, like peer software that we had 20 years ago, will now be able to set up a payment channel where they get paid and they compete. So if there's 10 people, they will take 1/10 of that money. If there's 100, they will take 100th. And what you will find is it will base itself on market forces. So if it is no longer economically viable, then there won't be 101. But if I want to have a faster connection for a period of time, I can throw a little bit more money into the pot. And now I make it 2 Bitcoin, because maybe I've got something on and I've got a marketing campaign and I want people to download my file really quickly. Now what happens is people come and realize there's more money. More money, again, the system will move towards market forces and you will now have twice as many bandwidth providers. People will download and start actually distributing your file to earn money. To do this, you need really small fees. You need to be able to break things down into fractions of a cent. And I don't want to see 1,000th of a cent. I want to see way smaller, because the more we break these things down into smaller components, the more uses are going to actually exist. Why have ads on Google or Alibaba or whatever else? They're horrible things. I hate doing a search and having it ordered based on what some mega corporation wants to tell me I should be looking at. I don't know about you. I want to search for what I want to search for, not what they want to tell me I should be searching for. And to do that, I want to be able to pay. I want to be able to pay 100th of a cent every time I click a search button. I think that's a good idea. That was the whole reason all these other things 20 years ago were trying to make a commercial internet. And because they failed, we ended up with Facebook. Because they failed, we ended up with Google. We ended up with Shitter. Everything like that. Because they needed to get people looking at ads. So they need people to basically keep looking at stupid ads that they never want to have anything to do with. So efficiency is built into Bitcoin. If we're going to actually scale, we need to understand the system. And it's not based on this concept now of how do I keep blocks small? It's based on economics. And it's based on distributing everything so that people specialize. So that some people will store blocks and they'll be paid for it. And some people will provide bandwidth and they'll be paid for it. And some people will provide hash power and they'll get paid for it. And some people will order blocks and get paid for it. Not everyone does the same thing. Everyone does the same thing is a terrible, terrible idea. It's what Gandhi wanted before 20 million people starved in India, where everyone gets to do the exact same thing in their little village and everyone's self-sufficient until they die. Unfortunately, it doesn't work. We have the society we have now because of specialization. Because some people are better mathematicians, and some people are better artists, and some people are better computer scientists, and some people are better musicians. And trust me, you don't want me composing music for you. I mean, I did piano, but composing music, well, I don't think anyone here would be turning up if I was going to sit there and compose my own music. I mean, I can make really terrible songs if you want, but I'm sure you don't want it. So, indexing and hashing. If we're talking about a structure, like a small block, we should just index it. Literally. We should just stick an order, go 0, 1, 0, 2. We just have a very simple sort of nibble-sized bit of information that says what order they're in. Because if anyone changes it, the single block hash covers everything. Doesn't matter. You have one hash, it covers the entire structure. So at the end of the day, hashing's really inefficient until you start using it for what it's about. It's not about securing the blockchain. That's a lie. Hashing does not secure anything. Even when you're talking about hash power, as people say, and I've even said myself, is a peacock tail. It's an evolutionary game theoretic concept. So who can tell me the game theoretic thing about a peacock? Anyone know that one? No? Okay, peacocks grow large tails. Peahens like peacocks with really large tails. The larger the tail, the better. The peahen's going to be strutting around going, "Goh, look at that guy's tail." The larger the tail, the sexier the peacock. So, question, why don't peacocks have 18 feet long tails? Because if they've got tails that long, they become lunch. They would try and get up in a tree branch and the tiger will go rip and pull them down. So this is the whole point. It is a signalling device. Basically, a tail needs to be as long as possible to show that the peacock is really fit. The fittest it can possibly be and get away with not being eaten. It can go, "Look, baby, my useless tail is that long and I'm alive." That's it. It's not, "Look, I've got a long tail, I've just been eaten." No one cares about that one. It's, I've got a long tail and I'm alive. And that's the whole point here. Miners, the guys supplying all that ASIC power, are running peacock tails. What they're doing is basically conspicuous spending. They are demonstrating to the network in a Veblen-esque type fashion, hey, I've got money, I'm spending it. At the end of the day, that shows everyone that these guys are invested, they have skin in the game. Why? Because if they cheat, they are easy to take down. That miner over in Shenzhen or Shenzhen province or whatever else with $100 million US invested is not going to break the law. They are not going to be an attacker. Because, so, Lynn, how long does it take to move a mining facility?
Yeah, about 2 weeks. Yeah.
How long does it take the police to come knocking on your door?
Yeah, with days.
So, would you go and decide to break the law?
Never thinking about it.
Exactly. That's the whole point. It's not about everyone getting away with things. It's about honesty, honest money. Bitcoin miners can't cheat because if they cheat, they are easy to catch. A Bitcoin miner who cheats is a peacock with an 18-foot tail. That's what the system is about. That's why all these silly things where people go, we can find a better proof of work where we actually solve problems. You can't. The system works because you waste money. Literally, you're burning cash. Akerlof, in his market for lemons, missed one thing. In the real world, people distinguish car buyers. They can tell the lemon car buyer and they can tell the guy who's not a lemon car buyer. Why? Because the guy who has a $10 million showroom has something to lose. The guy who is on the corner in a pop-up car yard, well, you probably don't trust the car salesman that much because, well, he hasn't invested anything. And that's what it's all about. It's an economic system. It stays honest because a cheating miner loses. We saw this in the past. We saw it when, for instance, a few miners weren't validating properly and were doing spy mining, and Bitcoin.com released a block that didn't meet the protocol specifics at the time, and they were just over by about 0.1%, and they got rejected. And then every other miner rejected them. And it took seconds. And it wasn't discovered by home users running Raspberry Pis. It was discovered by other miners. Because miners are incentivized. Miners care because the whole structure, it's using greed to actually make a system that works. Miners are incentivized to find where other miners do bad. If another miner makes a mistake, miners are incentivized to crush them. That's it, because they get money. The whole notion of a set block per every 2 weeks, with that limit, is if someone cheats, guess what? The same earnings, but the cheater loses. So cheating doesn't pay in Bitcoin. So over time, I'm going to explain how things like all these other problems people talk about, like mining fast and then dropping off and everything like that, won't work because the subsidy actually fixes it. Because over time, it becomes based on transaction volume, which solves everything. But I'm going to leave that one for a different day and leave questions for now. Thank you.